MVC Architecture and give you a basic introduction about that, and then we will build upon that. So let's start. And so this is MVC Architecture. Um, Today we are going to discuss about some basic introduction about it, and then we will do a demonstration on how to implement MVC architecture, and then we will go beyond MVC, and then we will have a short Q&A discussion. Maybe we can make the Q&A a bit lengthier if you are guys having any questions. It doesn't have to be related to MVC. If you guys have any questions, regarding your projects or internship, you can also ask them as well. So I am Nishan Chaturang. You can contact me over this email and over Twitter if you guys have any questions right after the session also. So before we go ahead, I want to highlight these two concepts. Uh, what is the differentiation between design pattern and architectural pattern? Because most of you guys will come across this two uh, terminology in the future. And also, you guys have heard about these frameworks by now because you are doing your level 2 projects. And software architecture and design pattern are two different things actually, but in some cases, these two overlap. So I would like to think MVC is kind of the belongs to this overlapping set of technologies. So you will understand why I say that. එතකොට මං එතන කිව්වේ එතකොට software architecture එකක් කියන්නේ එකක් design pattern එකක් කියන්නේ තව එකක්. ඒ දෙක අතර වෙනසක් තියෙනවා. ඒ වෙනස හඳුනා ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්න ඕනේ ඕගොල්ලෝ software engineer කෙනෙක් නම්. And okay. So software architecture is basically what the name says. It is the architecture of a system that describes what are the technologies that you're going to use, what are the relationships between those technologies, etc. So for an example, if you are developing, let's say, Moodle kind of an application, web application, you have to think about the database, you have to think about the front-end applications, the back-end frameworks, and other maybe if you are using cloud services, what kind of cloud services that you are going to use, what kind of if you're using serverless functions, what kind of serverless capabilities that you should have. Likewise, we have to, go in depth and decide what are the things that you have to do before you develop your system. And a design pattern is something is called a reusable solution to a recurring problem. So, say for an example, if you have a problem like accessing data, let's say if you it is a problem, no, so if you are using SQL Server or a MongoDB, then if you are coming across uh, several problems when you do that. By problems, I mean, let's say if you want to access data, if you want to update data, then there should be a standardized way, right? Otherwise, I will do it in a separate manner and some other person will do it another way. So the problem that gives us is that the code afterwards will not have readability or it will not have the testability. So writing software is not an easy task. It's not like printing uh, your name or hello world. It is more than that because in the industry, maybe you will, if you go to the industry, what you will have to do is participate in this software project team, and then you have to contribute to that team. So you don't, most of the times, you don't know the domain of the application, and so what you have to do is understand the domain. When you go to understand the domain and the code base of that particular software, I mean the system, uh, if the person before you uh, have done many mistakes, or the person before you have accessed the data the way he or she prefers, you may not be able to understand that. So, to overcome that kind of problems, we use software design patterns. So, there are many design patterns, and if you create a design pattern out of there are many actually, but obviously, you at this level, we or the industry does not expect you to create design patterns. You just use a design pattern in the out of the box. So the problem that solves is that if you are using if you are writing code in a standardized way, then everybody will be able to understand it and everybody will be able to learn it. Like, say, if you are learning accounts, financial accounts, so you know the basic concepts of financial accounts by now, like you know this T accounts, you know the ledgers. So ledgers are there because everybody can understand it very easily. Ledger accounts, right? ඒ කිව්වේ දැන් ledger account එකක් කියන එකක් තියලා කියන එකක් කවුරු හරි හැදලා තියෙන නිසා තමයි ඔයාලා ඒක ඉගෙන ගන්නේ. එතකොට ඔයාලා ledger account එකකට එකකින් කරන වැඩේ එක එක්කෙනා එක එක විදිහට කරන්න ගියොතින් එහෙම කාටවත් ඒක කියවන්න බැරි වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා හැමෝම එකඟ වෙලා තියෙනවා අපි මේ අයවැය ලෙජර් account එකක දාලා තියෙනවා කියලා. ඒ නිසා ඔයාලටත් ඒක උගන්වන්න පහසු වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒක උගන්වන කට්ටිය ඇති වෙලා තියෙනවානේ. So ඒ වගේ තමයි design pattern එකක් කියන්නේ. Right. So MVC actually goes under this architectural pattern because at the beginning when MVC is created, it was intended as an architectural pattern. But anyway, you can also use it as a design pattern as well. It doesn't matter. Both can be true. So if your application is built on top of MVC, then it could be an architectural pattern. If your application has a single component, say for an example, if your application's uh, front end, right? You know what is a front end and what is a back end. If only your application's front end is acting as MVC, that is also fine. In that case, that is a design pattern, right? There are two different things. They are two different things. You will understand them once we get to the demo, and we will discuss about how these frameworks and other technologies are utilizing MVC in the future. So I always say this before because most of you guys don't understand the basics of everything. So when you know do interviews and stuff in the industry, we see that undergraduates don't know the basics. We don't expect you to have you know software engineer kind of knowledge level when you go to the industry. We just expect to expect you to have some basic understanding about these things. So in terms of architectures and design patterns, also the same. You will learn these design patterns and different architectures in your level 3 subject modules. There's a subject module called Enterprise Applications Development. In there, you will learn it. So try to understand the basics of this. Don't go in depth. I know there are, very complex terminology, but it doesn't matter. You just, if you understand the basics of the architecture, then you will be fine. So when you go to understand the basics, you have to understand why MVC, why we need the MVC. So MVC stands for Model, View, and Controller. And models actually, so imagine that you are designing a problem and you're designing software to a problem. You guys also have learned Java and C. So you know what is functional programming is. So you don't just put all the code lines into a single function in the main method or in a single function, right? So you create multiple functions and then you divide your code into several maintainable parts. So in MVC, the same thing happens. So you are dividing your data, your business logic. Business logic means the domain aspect of the software. So, say for an example, um, if you want to say, okay, let's take a small example. If you want to upload a picture to Facebook, so your picture in your mobile phone can have multiple, can have like different people have different cameras, right? So because of that, the size of the image can be different. So if I take a picture of me using my phone, that image could be 5 megabytes. And if someone else with a better quality camera take a picture of myself, that could be like 10 megabyte or 15. So when you upload your picture to the Facebook or WhatsApp, the display picture, the algorithms that work should compress your picture. So you may might have noticed this when you send pictures over WhatsApp. Also, your quality of the pictures reduces, right? So that compression is part of the business logic. So to make the application work, you have to have that kind of uh, maintainability or so in case of WhatsApp, the problem is that the data problem, right? Everybody has that problem when you send in our country important that is an important issue, right? So if you want to send a 5 MB photo, that would take like at least 1 minute using WhatsApp. But because of that compression algorithm that WhatsApp has, it reduces the size of your photo and it will be sent you using like 100 kilobytes. So that is what happens in the business layer, like business logic layer. So dividing these functionalities into different layers is what this MVC does. So it is like, as I said earlier, it is just similar very similar to the functional programming that you do. You divide your program into different functions, right? ඒ කිව්වේ ප්‍රෝග්‍රෑම් එකේ කෑලි කොටස් වෙන් වෙන් වශයෙන් ෆන්ක්ෂන් වලට බෙදලා දීලා තියෙනවා. ඔයා මේක කරන්න, ඔයා මේක කරන්න. එතකොට ඒ බෙදලා දුන්නාම තියෙන වාසියක් තමයි එතකොට ඒ අදාළ ෆන්ක්ෂන් එකට දීලා තියෙන කොටස විතරක් අපිට ටෙස්ට් කරන්න ලේසි එකක්. හරිද? ටෙස්ට් කරනවා කියලා කියන්නේ දැන් අපි හිතමුකෝ ෆොටෝ එකක් අප්ලෝඩ් වෙනවා කියන එක ටෙස්ට් කරනවා නම් සම්පූර්ණ Facebook කියන එහෙම නැත්නම් WhatsApp කියන සිස්ටම් එකම ටෙස්ට් කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. ඒකට ෆොටෝ එක අප්ලෝඩ් කරනවා කියන කෑල්ල විතරක් අරගෙන ඒ කෑල්ල විතරක් ටෙස්ට් කරන්න පුළුවන්. නැත්තම් ඒ කෑල්ලට අලුතෙන් අපි හිතමු ෆීචර් එකක් ඇඩ් කරනවා, ඉම්ප්‍රූව්මන්ට් එකක් දෙනවා කියලා කියමු. එතකොට ඉම්ප්‍රූව්මන්ට් එකක් කරනකොට ඒ කෑල්ල විතරක් ටාගට් කරන්න පුළුවන්. හරිද? ඒ කෑල්ලට විතරක් ස්පෙෂලයිස් වෙච්ච ටීම් එකක් හදන්න පුළුවන්. හරිද? ෆොටෝ පැත්ත කියන්නේ ෆොටෝ අප්ලෝඩින් කියන කෑල්ල බලා ගන්න වෙනම ටීම් එකක් දාන්න පුළුවන්. එයාලට වෙන කිසිම දෙයක් අදාළ නැහැ. හරිද? එතකොට එයාලා දන්නේ නැහැ එතනින් එළිය වෙන්නේ මොකක්ද කියලා. එහා පැත්තේ ඉන්න ටීම් එක කරන්නේ මොකක්ද කියලා අදාළ නැහැ. ඒගොල්ලන්ට දීලා තියෙන වැඩේ ඒගොල්ලන්ට කරන්න පුළුවන්. අන්න ඒ වගේ මේවා මේ විදිහට බෙදලා දීලා තියෙන නිසා ලොජිකල් විදිහට බෙදලා තියෙන නිසා අපිට පුළුවන් වෙලා තියෙනවා අර මේන්ටේනබිලිටි කෝඩ් එකේ මේන්ටේනබිලිටි එක වැඩි කරන්න. ඒ කියන්නේ ලේසියෙන්ම කෝඩ් එක වෙනස් කරන්න, ටෙස්ට් කරන්න වගේ දේවල්. එතකොට ඔයාලට සම්බන්ධ වෙච්ච තව බෙස්ට් ප්‍රැක්ටිසස් එහෙම කියලා තියෙනවා. ඒව ගැන නම් ලොකුවට කතා කරන්න මම බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔහුගේ තියෙනවා ක්ලීන් කෝඩ් කියලා තියෙනවා, ඩ්‍රයි කෝඩ් ප්‍රින්සිපල්ස් කියලා තියෙනවා, වෙට් කෝඩ් ප්‍රින්සිපල්ස් කියලා තියෙනවා. එහෙම ක්ලීන් කෝඩ් ලියන්න පුළුවන් විදි තියෙනවා. හරිද? ඒව ඔයගොල්ලෝ බලන්න හිමීට. එතකොට එහෙමයි. දැන් ඒක තමයි MVC ඕන වෙලා තියෙන්නේ, right? So මෙතනදී MVC solves the problem of dividing the functionality of the application into different modules, mainly three modules: models, views, and controllers. Right? So model is it includes the data and its related logic. Data are related logic තියෙන්නේ model එකේ. The view is the presentation layer. We usually call it that's the presentation, or it is what is responsible for interacting with the users or the customers. And the controller is the interface between model and the view components, right? So controller actually acts as an interface. It directs your requests to either databases or to the views. So you might be asking, so the if the view is interacting with the users, then why are you calling the controller as the interface? That is the main design. Let's say design. That is the main design of MVC. So when you like go to a view for for an example, if you go to a web page, that is your view. But if you want to make an interaction with the data, say for an example, if you are filling a form, a registration form, let's say, if you're filling a registration form and you click on submit, it is true that you are clicking on the view, but the to save that data to to the database, you need the controller. So that is why it says it is an interface between model and the view, right? Not you and the view. It is the interface between model and the view. But it actually, in some cases, the controller can be the presentation layer because if you are creating a backend application, obviously you don't have a view, right? So in the backend applications, you have an API, application programming interface. So view is the front end application. So in that scenario, the control actually acts as the interface to the user or to the front end application. It doesn't matter if you understand what these three means and how they are connected. We will get to know them in the demonstration, and you will do your own research and understand how these things happen. If you want to know more, it doesn't matter if you understand this basic three first three lines of this slide, it is okay. So I have put some additional uh, explanation as well for view and to the control and model. So if you have time, you can go through them and understand how they are connected, but we will obviously be going to learn it in couple of minutes. So let's say for an example, if you are ordering food in a uh, restaurant. So the view is you. You are going to look at the um, menu and then you will order something. And the controller is the waiter. Waiter doesn't know about you. Controller doesn't care about who is the user or who is going to, how many kids do you have or what is your salary. Controller doesn't care. Controller gets what you give him as input, and then controller delivers that data to the model, right? And he says, okay, the customer at table 3 is asking for something, right? Let's say fried rice, right? I don't know these fancy uh, dishes in these restaurants. So, okay, so the controller says that to the model, and the model is the cook. He or she prepares the food. So the model again don't know who is the waiter. I mean, in a real world scenario that could be true, but it doesn't actually doesn't necessary to know the controller to prepare food, right? Controller is the waiter, so we don't care about the controller. We just uh, prepare the food based on the instruction that we know or that we have given. And then model gives the food again to the waiter, and waiter delivers that dish to the view. So think of that as this. So you will definitely understand what I'm trying to say. So these three people doesn't know about anybody or each other. They will just perform their tasks based on the input or the data given to them, right? So this is basically MVC. Let's take another example. Let's say this is a vehicle. So again, the view is the what you get when you go inside and when you sit on the driver's seat. So that is the user interface, and the controller is the engine. It takes your data or the input that you give to the engine using the steering wheel and the gears, and it will perform the task. So to perform that task, the engine requires fuel. That fuel is the data or the model, right? So understand MVC in these two basic examples, and then you will be able to understand what is happening in the web applications or other applications that utilizes MVC. Okay, so again, let's take now we are trying to go in detail or in depth into MVC. So if you don't understand anything, feel free to ask. Um, right. So the browser, usually in this case, let's say this browser is a user or a person, and they sends a request to the controller. To control the controller layer will asks the data from the model layer, and then controller will send that data to the view layer, right? One, step two, and step three. When the view is ready, we will send the result back to the user or to the browser, right? So this is how it's happening. So you can see how this controller is acting as an interface between the model layer and the view layer. And when you so you might be asking, so why doesn't the browser actually access the view first other than sending the request straight to the controller? That is what I said. In these web applications, you see this approach where you sends request to the controller layer because when you actually interact with the view layer also, that is actually the view also responsible for sending this requests to controller. But in the web applications, we usually uh, deal with these URLs, right? URLs or URIs, uniform resource locators. So this request under the hood, or actually behind the back, what they do is send request using a URL, right? If you are doing a level 2 projects, you must have come across this uh, concept. So you don't actually the view or the HTML actually uh, does not is not responsible for asking data. HTML can't do anything. HTML is a markup language, right? It does formats the way the page looks, and CSS adds the styling, and you know that, right? So the HTML is not responsible for getting data or displaying data. That is why this browser has to send this request to the controller, right? So to do that, maybe the browser or the view has that what you call this JavaScript or a client-side scripting language. Most of the times it's JavaScript. So using JavaScript, it sends the request to the controller, or in other words, to the backend. Then the controller is responsible for getting that data and showing it on the HTML, right? So that is why it is the step one goes to the controller layer, not to the view layer. If so it is true that we interact with the view, but the view cannot send requests. View is just HTML and CSS styling, right? I hope you understood that. And popular MVC frameworks, we have Ruby on Rails. These are actually small amount of MVC frameworks. There are many again. So I took these 6 because your level 2 projects probably resolve across these backend technologies. Ruby on Rails, Django is for Python, Spring MVC is for Java, Laravel Symfony is for PHP, and ASP.NET MVC is for C Sharp. Right. So now, before we go into web MVC, let's just simulate this MVC architecture in basic Java programming language because most of you guys might hate this frameworks or the level 2 projects. So because of that, let's just see if we can implement MVC in Java, right? So I will exit this and I will give you this. There are here you can see there are four files and the files I will start off with the controller or let's say model. So model, this is a class student model. It has two properties, registration number and the name. I have put an underscore in front of this variable name to distinguish them between the other parameters. So we have to, the student can have many attributes, of course, but for the sake of this demonstration, I think the student only has a registration number and a name. And we should have some other logic to set this registration number and get this registration number from the database or from the memory, right? So these four methods are responsible of doing that. So the get registration number returns registration number. So underscore registration number means this registration number is returning, right? And set registration number, when you are going to set registration number, you have to pass registration number via a parameter to this method, and this newly uh, passed registration number will be equal to the registration number that we have in the class, right? And again, to get name and to set name, we have two other methods. So I hope this implementation is very simple. I hope you understand that because this is simply very basic Java. But if you don't understand, that is also fine. I'm not saying it is not a possibility, but if you don't understand it, please raise your voice and ask. Okay. So that is the model. So as I mentioned earlier, in MVC, M is responsible for model and model is responsible for getting and accessing data. And then we will go to the view, right? So view, as I mentioned earlier, it is just displaying data. We have a print student detail method in student view class. It just prints student name and registration number in 3 lines, right? And that is the view. That is also very simple. It has only one method. It takes actually two arguments, student name and student registration number, and it prints them, right? And now you know, now you have see, so what is the model and what is the view. And without going into the controller, I want you to think about this. So to print this student, you have to call this method, print student details method. Before calling method, you have to have a student name and a student registration number, and to have that, you have to have a data in the database, right? Or in the memory. So if you go to the controller, you can see we create we have a constructor for that class student controller, and we are creating two instances of the model and the view, and then in the constructor we are assigning this model and view to the ones that are passed into this controller. And then again we have set student name get student name, sorry, get student name, set student registration number, and get student registration number. Again, similar to those four methods which we had in the model class. Actually, you can see we are actually calling that method in the model. Model.setName, model.getName, model.setRegistration number, model.get registration number. So this is possible because we are creating an instance of the student model here, and that instance is not actually enough. We need to instantiate that. To instantiate that, we have to pass another model to this controller, right? So obviously at this moment you might be thinking, why go this length, right? Why do we have to do this? This is very complex. No, we have to do that because this is maintainable. So we have different areas of the project that we have divided. It is true, it is a little bit complex and it is little bit hard to understand. It is questionable why we have to go this far to, just to print a student detail on a command line interface. Yeah, that is true. I accept your argument, but in the long run, if you doing a very big application, if you are not dividing these tasks into different areas, you will come across all sort of problems, starting with testing and then into bugs, then into features, improvements. So different problems can arise if you don't divide these tasks into different areas. That's why we have the view to display and we have the model to set and get the data from the databases or the memory. And the controller, as I mentioned earlier, it is an interface between the view and the model to act as the interface, it has to create two instances of those two. හරි ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් view එක කරන්නේ print කරන එක model එකෙන් කරන්නේ data access කරන එක හරි නැත්නම් data ආපහු write කරන එක database එකට හරි memory එකට හරි දැන් මෙතන නම් අපිට database එකක් නැහැනේ මෙතන අපි memory එකේ තමයි තියෙන්නේ private field දෙකක් තියෙනවානේ registration එකයි name එකයි මේ private field දෙක memory එකේ තියෙන්නේ මේ field දෙක access කරන එකයි ඒ දෙක update කරන එක තමයි මේ method වලින් කරලා තියෙන්නේ හරි මේ method එකකින් දැන් get registration number කියන method එකකින් කරලා තියෙන්නේ memory එකේ තියෙන registration number එක return කරන එක return registration number කියලා තියෙනවා ඊට පස්සේ set registration number කියන එකකින් කරලා තියෙන්නේ memory එකේ තියෙන registration number එකට සමාන කරනවා අපි අලුතෙන් මේ method එකට pass කරන registration number එක so එහෙම තමයි වෙන්නේ හරි එතකොට මේ දෙක අතර ඉන්ටර්ෆේස් එකනේ අපි කිව්වේ controller එක ඒ නිසා තමයි controller එක මේ classes දෙකේ instance දෙකක් හදලා තියෙන්නේ student model එකකින් instance එකයි student view එකකින් instance එකයි හරි හරි එතකොට එහෙම හදලා ඉනිෂියලයිස් කරාට විතරක් මදිනේ ඉන්ස්ටන්සියේට් කරන්නත් ඕනේ එතකොට ඒක කරන්න තමයි මේ controller එක ඔයගොල්ලෝ දන්නවා මේවා මේ Java වල object oriented programming වල ඔයගොල්ලෝ කරලා තියෙනවානේ constructor එකකින් constructor එකකින් මොනවද field set කරන හැටි එතකොට ස්ටඩන්ට් මොඩල් එකකුයි ස්ටඩන්ට් view එකකුයි constructor එකට pass කරලා තියෙනවා ඒක pass කරාම මෙන්න මේ fields දෙක set වෙනවා model එකයි view එකයි ඊට පස්සේ අර විදිහටම අපි කරන්නේ මේ මොඩල් එකේ තිබිච්ච මෙතඩ් පාවිච්චි කරලා set name get name පාවිච්චි කරලා මේ ඒ fields දෙක වෙනස් කරන එක. ඒකට අන්තිමට දැන් මම කියවනේ දැන් control එක interface එක කියලා. ඒ නිසා view එකටත් සම්බන්ධයක් තියෙනවා. So because of the controller is interface between model and the view, we need to update the view as well or send data back to the view. So to update view, we have another method called update view. And you know that in the view we have a method called print student details. So that is why in the controller we are calling that method and we are passing the name and the registration number of the model, right? Sorry. Right. So that is it. Let's run that, and obviously in Java we have to have a main method. In the main method, you can see we have created um, a student model, and then we have student view, and then we have the student control. Three main components of our application are those. So to get the student mod student model, we have a separate method, retrieve student from database. So we don't have actually database, so we are just setting the hard coded these values, Robert, and the registration number is 10. So private static student model, retrieve student from database method will create student model object, and it will create that it will instantiate a single student, and having name Robert and having registration number 10, and it will return that student. So this method is only responsible for creating or simulating this database effect. ඒ කියන්නේ database එකක් නැහැනේ අපිට. ඒ නිසා database එකකින් data එනවා වගේ කියලා අපි උපකල්පනය කරලා මේ පොඩි method එකක් ලියලා තිනවා student මේ model එකේ instance එකක් හදලා මේ sample එහෙම නැත්නම් dummy student කෙනෙක්ව return කරන්න. ඒ නිසා තමයි මෙහෙම method එකක් අපි හැදුවේ. හරි. ඊට පස්සේ view එකේ instance එකක් හදලා තිනවා, control එකේ instance එකක් හදලා තිනවා. control එකේ instance එකක් හදන්න යද්දි අපි ඊට මතකයි control එකේ constructor එකේට අපි pass කරන්න ඕනේ model එකකුයි view එකකුයි. හරි. ඒ නිසා තමයි අපි උඩදී මොකද කරේ model එකක් හැදුවා, view එකක් හැදුවා. ඒ හදපු model එකයි view එකයි අපි මේ control එකට pass කරලා තියෙනවා. student control එකට pass කරලා තියෙනවා. හරිද? මං හිතනවා දැන් පොඩ්ඩක් පැහැදිලි වුණා වගේ ඇති කියලා. මොකද්ද මේ උනේ කියලා. Right? Then we have in the controller we have this update view method. We call it once. When we call it sorry, when we call the update view once in the student controller, you can see we are printing the student details. And if you want to change the name or create another student, set name, we can use the controller method to set student name. දැන් set student name තියෙන එක තියෙන්නේ controller එකේ. ඒ හරි student controller එකේ තමයි set student name තියෙන්නේ. දැන් set name එකක් තියෙනවනේ මෙතන model එකෙත්. ඉතින් අපිට බැයිද model එකම එකපාර call කරන්න මේ controller එකක් කරා යන්නේ ඇයි? controller එකේ set student name call නොකර model එකේ set name call කරන්න බැරිද මෙතනින්? මෙතනින් model එකේ set name model.model එකේ instance එකක් හදලා දාන්න. එහෙමත් පුළුවන්. හැබැයි ඉතින් අර එතකොට ආපහු කපල් වෙනවනේ. කපල් වෙනවා කියලා කියන්නේ මේ එහෙම කපල් නෙමෙයි. මේ දෙක මොඩල් එකයි අපේ කන්ට්‍රෝල් එකයි කපල් වෙනවනේ. එහෙම කපල් වෙන්නේ අපි ඔකට කියනවා ඩීකපලින් කියලා. හරිද? ඩීකපල් වෙන්න ලියන්න ඕන. ඒවා එක්කෙනෙක් තව කෙනෙක් ගැන දැනුවත් වෙන්න බෑ. දැන් කන්ට්‍රෝල් එක දන්නේ මේ මෙහෙම මෙතඩ් එකක් තියෙනවා. එයා ගාව. එයා ඒක කෝල් කරනවා. හරි දැන් ඔයාලට පේනද මේන් මෙතඩ් එකේ අපි දන්නේ මේ මොඩල් ගැන මුකුත් දන්නේ නැහැ. එතකොට අපි කන්ට්‍රෝල් එක තමයි කතා කරන්නේ. හරිද? ඒ විදිහට මේ අතර අර වෙනසක් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඩිස්ටින්ග්විෂ් වෙන්න ඕනේ ෆන්ක්ෂනැලිටි අතින්. මේ එතකොට තමයි මේවා easily understandable එහෙම නැත්නම් readable. හරිද? එතකොට මේ ටෙස්ට් කරන්න ලේසි, මේන්ටේන් කරන්න ලේසි. දැන් මම දන්නම් මේ ලෙවල් එකේ කියන්නේ level 2 project කරන level එකේ ඔයාලට තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ මොනවද මේ මොකද්ද මේන්ටේනබිලිටි ඔය තේරෙන්නේ කෝඩ් එක කියවලා තේරෙන්නේ වගේ ප්‍රශ්න ඔය මේ ලෙවල් එකේදී නෑ. ඔයාලට තාම කවුරුත් ලියපු ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් එකක් අතට දීලා මේකේ මෙන්න මේ කෑල්ල හදලා දෙන්න කියලා දීලා නෑනේ. ඔයගොල්ලෝ මුල ඉඳන් කවුරු හරි කියපු එකක් හදාගෙන යනවනේ. නේද? ඔයගොල්ලෝ කියන්නේ කවුරු හරි කියපු එකක් කියන්නේ ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් එක දීපු කම්පැනි එකකින් මේක හදලා දෙන්න කිව්වහම ඉතින් ඔයගොල්ලන්ගේ ටෙක්නොලොජි ස්ටැක් එක දාලා ඒක කරගෙන යනවා. මිසක් හදපු ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් එකක් දීලා කෝඩ් එක අතට දීලා මේකට මේ අලුතෙන් මෙන්න මේ කෑල්ල හදලා දෙන්න හරි මේකේ මෙන්න මෙතන මේක කරද්දි මෙතන එරර් එකක් එනවා ඒක හදලා දෙන්න හරි කියලා දීලා තියෙනවද නෑනේ. මං හිතන්නේ නෑ එහෙම ඇති කියලා. එහෙම දීලා තියෙනවා නම් හොඳයි පොඩි ප්‍රැක්ටිස් එකක් හම්බ වෙනවා. Usually what happens is in the industry you will get a existing application and you have to develop improvements and resolve bugs in that application. So in that scenario, this kind of task differentiation or delegation will come in handy. So that is why we need to have these kinds of implementations, right? So again, quickly I will again go through what we did. We have the student view. It takes a string parameter, student name, and student registration number, and it will print those two. And in the model, we have a field called registration number and the name. So what we need to do is access these two, and we have to edit these two fields, right? So to do that, we have to have this kind of four methods. And in the controller, we are calling those four methods using the methods that we have in the controller. And in the controller also, we need to have the model and the view because controller is the interface between the view and the model. So what we do is we edit this model that has been passed into the application, and then we can edit or set or right? Get or set these fields, either name or either registration number. And when it comes to the view, we need to print that data. So that is why we are printing student details, and we are calling this get name and get registration number from because we need to print. That is why we are only calling the get, right? Because to print student details in the view, we have the student name and student registration number as parameters. And in the main method, we are creating three instances of the model, the view, and the controller. And then to print, we have something called update view in the controller. You saw that in the update view, we are printing the data. So we call update view, we will get printed these two, Robert and 10. And if you are again calling the set student name with John, this Robert will be replaced with John, and again it will be printed uh, as John and 10 because we are not setting the registration number, we are only setting the student name. We'll try to run it and see. Okay, we have two errors. Okay, right. So the problem here is, I think some of you guys might have noticed this. So this model is not accessible here because this model is coming on to this controller, and it is setting that into the fields we have mentioned here. So what we need to do is we have to get the field from this, and yes, like so, right. Now if we run it, you can see we have student name Robert in the first line and registration number 10, and then we have student name John with the same registration number, right? So that is the basic understanding or the minimal implementation of MVC if you are creating a console application, right? So what we did, uh, we created we created instances of three modules that we have, which are model, the view, and the controller. and then we call update view once, and it will print Robert 10, and then we set the student name as John, and then we again update view. Then the name is of the student is John, not Robert, right? So I hope this is clear. If you don't understand it, you can ask. Or after the session also, you can drop me an email and ask. Or in the Q&A session, you can ask it. So I hope this is clear, because this is just very basic Java implementation. So sorry about that error. Actually, I will explain it again. So if you didn't understood it. So this model, we had sorry, earlier we had model, not underscore model, right? We had model like this. So the problem with this is this model is not accessible in this scope. This is a function called update view, and only variable accessible in this inside this function is these two functions, because they are in the class level, not in the method level. But this model variable that we are passing into the constructor is uh, not accessible outside this method. I mean this constructor, right? So that is why it throwed an error. So you might have noticed that, because you are very familiar with, I know, very familiar with object-oriented programming by that moment, even though I am not. So that is what has happened, right? You We are using different object-oriented programming concepts here, encapsulation and abstraction as well, because we are using private fields and public methods, right? So to modify this model, which is a private field, uh, we are using a public method, and because this model is not accessible to the outside viewers, it is encapsulated inside this student controller. Likewise, there are many object-oriented concepts at play here, but since this is not a OOP session, I'm not going to cover those things, but I hope you guys understanding these things, because as I said earlier, these basics things are the ones that are very important if you're going to the industry, and in the interviews also they will ask these very basic questions like constructor overloading, overriding, and encapsulation, polymorphism. These things are the very first questions that you will be asked at. So if you don't know that, then you will definitely fail these interviews. So try to get some basic understanding. I will give you this code as well, um, and then you can understand how to implement these things, and you will get to know this, right? And moving forward, so this is just a console application, right? So if you want to go within the next level of the advancement that we come across is web applications. So web applications, in the sense, as I mentioned earlier in that presentation also, um, in the presentation also you saw this these kind of web frameworks are there, Django, Spring MVC. So if you understand what happened in this Java console application, you will definitely understand all of those front end, I mean the web applications. It is just a matter of getting to know the basic functionality of a one framework or one architecture. Then you will obviously you don't have to go through each and every one of them with like one day. Within one day or two, you can definitely understand all of these frameworks. It is very simple, right? It is just a matter of time, actually. It doesn't take much time. It will only take like 2 to 3 days. If you can go through all of these frameworks and you can understand these. If you know the very basics, that is what I want to say. Right. So now I have another framework which is what I am familiar with, ASP.NET MVC. So I have an application called ASP.NET MVC demo. And this in this project also you can see there are different folders to for controllers, for models, and for the views. So here also, if you go to inside, let's say I have created the student controller, and I will show you what happens in these controllers. Right. So you can see it has a method called index, and that index is when that index method is gets called, it will return a view. It has some logic to access the data from the model. So I'm not going to go into deep into this framework. So because this is not a .NET session, because and what you have to understand is the implementation, basic implementation of this framework. It has some controllers via in the student controller, and inside the controller we have like different methods to index is the like kind of a home page or the first page, and then we have like a details page, and then we have a create page to create students, and then we have edit page to edit students, right? So that is the controller, and when you call in any one of these methods, it will return a view with the data. If you are only displaying data, you will return a view, and if like doing something, some changes, like let's say if you are creating a student, then before creating the student, you have to actually create that. I mean, before returning the view, you have to create that student in the database. So this context is like think of it as the access point to the database or the model, um, because we are actually going another layer in this framework. Uh, like we are using another abstraction layer called this data context. Uh, I'm like I'm not going to go deep into these things, but before explaining that, I think I need you to understand what happened to the models layer. We have these models. We have student model has an ID and has a name, just like we had in this in that console application. Um, so when you call that uh, when if you want to update or edit the student, obviously the student is in the database. So to access database, we have data context. In the context, we are using the entity framework, another framework to act as an abstraction layer between the database and the model classes. So here we are saying that we have a DB set of students, and we are calling that student DB set as students. And this field is the one that we access in the controller. If you go to the controller, you can see we are accessing this context. This context is injected from the controller. I mean the constructor, just like we saw in that Java console application. We are uh, accessing this data context class that we have here, and we are modifying or accessing those fields in the database using this context, right? So that is what context is. මේ context කියන්නේ මොකක්ද කියලා මට පෙන්වන්න ඕනේ වුණේ. හරි. එතකොට ඒක මොඩල් එකකින් එන එකක් කියලා ඔයාලට තේරෙන්න ඕන. එතකොට දැන් ක්‍රියේට් කරන්න ගියාම ස්ටුඩන්ට් කෙනෙක් ඒ data context එකේට ස්ටුඩන්ට් කෙනෙක්ව ඇඩ් කරලා, එහෙම නැත්නම් database එකට ස්ටුඩන්ට් කෙනෙක්ව ඇඩ් කරලා එයාව සේව් කරලා මේ අලුතෙන් view එකක්, එහෙම නැත්නම් අලුතෙන් හැදිච්ච ස්ටුඩන්ට් ඉන්න view එක මේ පෙන්වන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම නැත්නම් අලුත් ස්ටුඩන්ට්. ඒක තමයි මේ කරලා තියෙන්නේ. හරි. අපි මේක පොඩ්ඩක් කරලා බලමු. විනාඩි 5ක් වගේ අරන්. So I hope you understand in this frameworks like .NET or MVC also. .NET MVC also we are using the same principles to do the work, right? So it doesn't matter it is a web framework. It is the very similar. It is very similar to the console application we created, right? It the controller actually in the controller you have this um, methods, and these methods get executed based on the input that they receive, right? So let's say the details, if you want to view a detail of a student, obviously that is going to be student name only. We only have the student name as the student detail. If you open the database, I'm using SQLite database. You can see we have two fields, ID and name, and we have Nishan, John, and Chris in the table. So to get the details, we need to pass the ID of that student, and if that ID is uh, null, we will return a not found error. And if that if that doesn't get executed, we will get the students from the database, and we will check if there's a student in the database that we have passed to that this method using this ID. We are checking the database for that ID, and then if that is not also work, if that student is also null, then we again return not found. And if that didn't gets executed, we will return the view with the student that we found. Right? That is only what is happening. We'll check these things by using breakpoints, and you will understand how these things happen. But basically, what you have to understand is the method in this controller accesses the database and it returns the view, right? That is only thing you have to understand. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ method වලින් කරන්නේ database එක access කරලා model classes පාවිච්චි කරලා model classes පාවිච්චි කරන්න ඕන හින්දා තමයි context කියලා තව layer එකක් හැදුවේ අපි. එහෙම නැත්නම් context කියලා තව class එකක් හැදුවේ. ඒක මේ framework එකකින් එන functionality එකක් මිසක් MVC වල තියෙන functionality එකක් නෙමෙයි. හරි? ඒ නිසා තමයි මම ඒකගෙන වැඩි කියන්න යන්නේ නැත්තේ. මේ data context කියලා class එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒ class එක හරහා තමයි අපි database එකේ තියෙන tables access කරන්නේ. දැන් මේ table එකේ එක table එකයි තියෙන්නේ. එක database මේ database එකේ එක table එකයි තියෙන්නේ. students කියලා. මේ ඒ නිසා තමයි එහෙම එකක් තියෙන්නේ එතන. ඒ නිසා ඒක වැඩි හිතන්න එපා. එතකොට ඒ database එක access කරලා අපි student කෙනෙක්ව ගන්නවා. ඊට පස්සේ student ව return කරනවා view එකට දාලා. හරි? එතකොට views කියන ඒවා වෙනම තියෙනවා. views කියලා folder එකක් තියෙනවා. ඔයාලට පේන ඇති. views කියලා ගොඩක් තියෙනවා. home, shared home ගොඩක් තියෙනවා. දැන් අපිට ඕනේ students views. එතකොට student index view එක තමයි මේ තියෙන්නේ. එතකොට index method එක call වුණාම මේ framework එකෙන් automatically index view එක return වෙනවා. ඒක තමයි framework එකෙන් කරලා තියෙන්නේ. හරි. .NET MVC framework එකෙන් ඒවා ඔක්කොම handle වෙනවා. ඒක ඔයගොල්ලන්ට configure කරන්න අවශ්‍ය නැහැ. So when we call the index method, it will return the view that is responsible for this index method. So we have a view called index, which is some HTML and some logic with C#. And if you call details, details view will be returned. Details, it also has some HTML and C# code. So likewise, depending on the controller or the method that the request receives, it will return the that required view. So in case of the details that we have been talking about, it returns the view that corresponds to this method, which is the details view, right? Right. So we will run this application and see how this is happening. In the meantime, if you guys have any questions, you can ask. So to activate this controller, which is the student controller, we have to go to the uh, we have to send a request actually. So if you are a user or the browser, you have to request this controller to access these methods. So as I mentioned earlier, in web frameworks, the request comes under the URLs. So if you go to hostname slash students, this the method executed is the index, right? Because index is the most. Let's put a breakpoint in here, and we will refresh the page so you will understand it. Right. So you can see the breakpoint has been hit. The index method has been called. Right. So if you go through that specific method, you will get this view. Now, if you click on the details, let's put a breakpoint. So what you have to understand is if you go to like if you want to view the details of the first person, so you have to pass that ID of that person to this method, right? So you saw that here you have to pass that ID, otherwise that won't work. That also happens in the background. I'm not going to go into details. So you can see our URL changed to details slash one. If you go to like details slash two, you will get the John. And if you go to details slash three, you don't have a three. That is why it says not found. So let's say okay, so we have four, not three, because I deleted three earlier. So let's access four. So Chris is here. So so you can see how this is happening, right? And we will put a breakpoint also into this details method as well. Let's say how it fetches data and shows that. Okay, so in the ID we have, you can see parameter has come as one, and then you check if the ID is null. That is not the case, so we skip that, and then we go to here. We are accessing the database and try to get the student. If you go to student, you can see we have student and with ID and with name Nishan. So now we check if the student is null, and again that is not the case. Student is not null. So we skip that, and then we go to returning the view. Right? So that is basically the uh, high level understanding of a web framework, right? So all the web frameworks that I have mentioned here acts as a similar manner. Ruby on Rails, Django, Spring MVC, Laravel, Symfony. The people who have doing these other frameworks may be familiar with the concepts that I have shown here. That is because they are very similar. So that is actually another advantage of learning these architectures and design patterns. Because if you know one architecture, then you can easily learn all those other frameworks that are used to utilizing this uh, architecture. So that is why I'm going to stress to you that you have to understand very basics of these architectures to work in the industry. You don't have to study Ruby on Rails. You don't have to study Django, right? So what you have to do is understand MVC. That is it. If you understand MVC, learning these things become very easy, right? So I hope you understood what's happening in ASP.NET MVC. Similarly, you can edit this person, Nishan, let's say Nishan C. And if you save it, okay, so we have breakpoint at index. I will continue it. So we have Nishan C. And if you want to delete him, you can delete that person, delete, right? So every method in this controller, student's controller works in a similar manner. So whichever path we go, you can see we are still on the student's controller. I will remove these breakpoints, otherwise it is going to get in the way. So if you go to details, you can see we are inside the student controller, and then within the student controller, the details method is executed with the parameter 2. Right? If you go to edit, you can see student edit method with 2. Right? If you go to delete, student controller delete method with parameter 2. So likewise, we have different methods inside this controller. So this controller got activated with this method as you saw using the URL. So the index, this is actually the index method, so we don't see it, but you can type it and again you will get the same result. So likewise, this is how this MVC is implemented in web frameworks, right? So this is the way place where you send requests to the controller. We actually don't, so we actually click on these buttons, right? That is true. But by clicking these things, we are actually sending requests to the controller, right? I want you to understand that. See, so that is why we have shown you that this web browser sends requests to the controller layer, not to the view layer, right? Right. I hope you understood that. And moving forward, I have to add some another uh, important point to this. So, when it comes to front-end frameworks, um, you know that most of the time these days we are using like React.js, AngularJS, and Vue.js. Like so, we are using all sorts of JavaScript frameworks, right? So, in these frameworks also we are using another architecture. We call it the MVVM architecture. I will show you that MVVM. It is actually what happens in MVVM is right. MVVM is so you saw that in MVC the user sends the your request to the controller, and then the controller accesses this model and view and updates and renders that view. So in MVVM, what happens is we are replacing this controller with uh, with a view model, and the request from the user actually comes to the view. So obviously, when we are using a front-end application, our backend is not there. So we have to, work with the data or manipulate data in the view itself in some cases. In most of the cases nowadays, we have to do that. Again, front end එකේදීම data manipulate කරලා data වලට එක එක transformation add කරලා data වල වෙනස් කිරීම කරන එක front end එකේම කරන්න වෙන්න වෙන අවස්ථා තියෙන. ගොඩක් වෙලාවට දැන් අද කාලේ නම් එහෙම තමයි වෙන්නේ. ඒ කියන්නේ client side එකේ business logic එකක් තියෙනවා. එහෙම වුණාම අපිට සිද්ධ වෙනවා මේ controller එක උඩ හැමතිස්සෙම depend වෙන්න ඕනේ. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැක්කා අර MVC framework එකේදී වුණත් මේ index method එක හැමතිස්සෙම call වෙන්න ඕන. මේ list එක බලනවා නම් index method එක call වුණොතින් විතරයි මේක update වෙන්නේ. හරි. ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් අපි index method එකට break point එකක් දාලා let's edit John and John ට දාමු John Cena කියලා. Right. And if we save it, you can see we need to, the index method gets called every time, right? Other because of without in calling this controller method, we cannot update the view. Controller method එකේ index method එක call නොකර මේ view එක update කරන්න බෑනේ. මේක ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇත්තටම. So because of that issue, we are using this new approach in the front-end frameworks called MVVM. ඒ ප්‍රශ්න නිසා තමයි මේ අපි MVVM කියන ආකිටෙක්චර් එකට යන්නේ. මම මේක ගැනත් පොඩ්ඩක් කියන්නම් ඔයාලට. වැදගත් වෙයි මොකද මේවා තමයි ඉතින් අහන්නේ. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ ඇංගියුලර් දන්නවා කිව්වට බෑ. ඉතින් මේවා දැනන් හිටියේ නැත්තම් බෑ. එතකොට මේ රයිට්. එතකොට මේ වගේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැන්ට පේන ඇති රික්වෙස්ට් එක එන්නේ කන්ට්‍රෝලර් එකට නෙමෙයි. රික්වෙස්ට් එක කෙලින්ම view එකට තමයි එන්නේ. view එකෙන් view model කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා. view model එක තමයි ඊට පස්සේ model එක access කරන්නේ. model එකෙන් view model එකට එහෙම එහෙම දෙපැත්තටම මේ data transformation එක යනවා. ඔයගොල්ලෝ අහලා ඇති two way data binding කියලා කතාවක්. හරි. එතකොට sorry. ඒක නිසා තමයි මේ two way data binding කියන එක ඕන වෙලා තියෙන්නේ අර ප්‍රශ්නේ නිසා. ඒකට Angular ඊට පස්සේ front end frameworks වල එහෙම ඒවා තියෙන්නේ ඒ two way data binding කියන එක තියෙන්නේ මේ problem එක mitigate කරන්න. Right? So what happens is in the MVVM we replace controller with the view model and then we update the view from the view model, right? MVVM example is most popular or the at least the first one, the first popular framework that we so using this approach is the Angular. So in the Angular example, let's open up. I will show you that also. I have a demo application for that as well. Let's see. Okay, it's okay if you don't know Angular. Maybe you are using some other framework like React or Vue. It doesn't matter. Everywhere we use this MVVM architecture nowadays because we need to update the views depending on the data that the view has, not by going back to database and coming through the controllers. Our controller මේ control එක හරහා ගිහලා අර වටයක් ගහලා එන්න වෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවනේ. එතකොට ඒක නැති කරන්න තමයි මේ MVVM තියෙන්නේ. හරි. එතකොට Angular application එකේ අපි බැලුවොත් එහෙම HTML file එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒකේ තියෙනවා මේ input field එකක්. ඒ කියන්නේ text box එකක්. හරි. එතකොට text box එකේ තියෙනවා මෙන්න මෙහෙම Angular වලට විශේෂ වෙච්ච syntax එකක් මේ තියෙන්නේ. This is syntax specific to Angular which says ng model. So now you know what is a model, right? So now you are not uh, you know unfamiliar with these terms. දැන් දන්නවනේ මොඩල් එක කිව්වම කොහෙන්ද මේ කියන්නේ data කතාවක් තමයි කියන්නේ. ඒතකොට data එනවා name කියලා එකකට කියලා තමයි කියලා තියෙන්නේ. හරිද? එතකොට නැත්තම් මේකට අපි දාන data මෙන්න මේ ng model එකට save වෙනවා වගේ එකක් නේද නිකන් කියලා තියෙන්නේ. නිකන් එහෙම හිතෙන්න එපා model කිව්වහම. හරි. එතකොට ඔයගලන්ට පේන ඇති ඒ නමම name කියන නමම මෙතනත් තියෙන hi my name is කියලා මේ වරන් ඇතුලේ. This is again syntax specific to Angular. So at the moment when you see the model name here, you have to understand this is something to do with data, right? So this field called name is again used inside this h3 tag with again some syntax specific to Angular. So what this does is it creates the interface between the uh, view model and the view. So in Angular, the view model is the TypeScript file that is associated with this HTML. Inside this HTML, inside this TypeScript file, you can see there's an input method called name, and it is initialized to the name Nisha. දැන් මේ name කියන field එකට string එකක් ඒ field එක. එතකොට ඒ field එකට initial value එකක් තියෙනවා නිශාන් කියලා. Now what happens is inside the view, which is the HTML, we are setting the text of this input. මේ text box එකේ ඇතුලේ තියෙන text එක name කියලා name කියන එකට set කරනවා. දැන් මේ name එන්නේ කොහෙන්ද? Where this name field comes from? It is coming from the view model. View model is this TypeScript file, which is a class, and it has this field, right? අර models වල දැක්කනේ ඔයාලා මේකේ. දැන් මේකේ Java file එක ගමු. Java model එක. දැන් මේකේ fields තියෙනනේ මේ string registration number, string name. ඒ වගේම තමයි. දැන් මොඩල් එකක් ඇතුළට එපා ෆීල්ඩ්ස් දාන්න. ඒ වුණාට අපි කරන්නේ මොඩල් එක නැතුව view model කියලා එකක් හදලා ඒක ඇතුළට ෆීල්ඩ්ස් ටික දාපු එක දාලා තිනවා මෙතන. කො මෙතන. එතකොට ඔයාලට පේනවා මේ මේ name එක කියන එක තමයි අපි view එකේදී දාලා තියෙන්නේ. Now we don't have the logic to write this name into the database or like so. ඒ කියන්නේ අර ඇත්ත මොඩල් එක දැන් මේක view model එක නම් මොඩල් එක කවුද කියලා ආයිනේ. ඇත්ත මොඩල් එක කොහෙද කියලා අපි දැන් මෙතන නම් ඉම්ප්ලිමන්ට් කරලා නැහැ. ඇත්ත මොඩල් එක ඉම්ප්ලිමන්ට් කරනවා නම් ඒක database එකට write කරලා database එකකින් data ගේන ටික ඒ ටික වෙනම ලියන්න ඕනේ. වෙන කොහේ හරි file එකක් දාලා අපි ඔය services you might have heard this term called Angular services. We need to create another file to create that logic to access database and get the data from the get data uh, from databases. But what we do here is we don't do that. I'm just showing the functionality between the or the relationship between the view and the view model. View is our HTML file. View model is the TypeScript file that is associated with that HTML file, right? I hope you understood that. Let's go to that URL and see. Okay, because of we are initializing this field name to Nishan, we have that here. And because we in the view we say, okay, this same name goes into this H3 as well. Hi, my name is this name. It is also displayed here. Now, if you want to update this view with some other name, say John, in MVC, we have to go through the controller, right? In MVC අපිට මේක මේ නිශාන් කියන එක ජෝන් වගේ නමකට වෙනස් කරන්න ඕන නම් control එක හරහා ගිහලා database එක හරහා ගිහලා මේ එන්න ඕන. ආපහු view එක මුල ඉඳන් render වෙන්න ඕනේ. මම හිතනවා ඒක පැහැදිලි ඇති කියලා. හරි. ඒ ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවා. දැන් මෙතනදී හැබැයි එහෙම නැහැ. දැන් view model එකක් එහෙම නැත්නම් MVVM architecture එක දැම්මම මෙතන type කරන ඕන එකක් අපිට ඒ වෙලෙම මේ view එක update වෙනවා. View gets updated automatically because we are using MVVM architecture, right? So we don't actually have a model here as well, right? We only have the view and the view model. We update the view using the view model. We don't have a controller, right? එතකොට ඔයාලට තේරෙනවනේ ඉතින් මේක මේ ජෝන් කියන එක database එකක save වෙන්නේ නැහැ. මේක database එක save වෙන්න නම් submit button එකක් වගේ එකක් දාලා ඒක එහෙම යනවා යන්න ඕනේ. ඒක ඉතින් persistence layer එකනේ. ඒ කියන්නේ database එකේ ස්ථිරව තියාගන්න තැනනේ එතන. හැබැයි view එකක් අප්ඩේට් කරන්නත් database එක හරහා ගිහින් එනවා කියන එක මේ අමතර වැඩක් නේ. ඒක ටිකක් architectural. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ front end framework වලදී ඒක ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා තමයි මේ VM architecture එකේදී view එක render කරන්න මේ control එකක් හරහා යන්නේ නැතුව view එක මේ automatically on the fly. ඒ කියන්නේ එවෙලෙම render කරන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්න හදලා තියෙන්නේ. Right? Okay, I hope you understood that. MVC and MVVM, right? So I will give these slides to you. Maybe Power can share the links to the slide, and you can go through these things and understand uh, what what are the problems with MVC and MVVM. So MVVM වලත් ඕන තරම් ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා. MVC වලත් ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා. disadvantages තියෙනවා. ඒ වුණාට ඒවා පාවිච්චි කරලා විසඳලා තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න ඊට වඩා ලොකුයි. ඒ නිසා තමයි මේ වගේ ෆ්‍රේම්වර්ක්ස් එහෙම නැත්නම් ආකිටෙක්චර්ස් තියෙන්නේ. එතකොට සමරි එකක් විදිහට කිව්වොත් දැනගන්න ඕගොල්ලෝ MV okay, I will tell it in English. As a summary, you have to know the different basic understanding of these architectures. You will definitely get this understanding in your level 3 semester 1, and different architectures, different design patterns, and object oriented concepts, and how these and why we need these architectures. මේ ආර්කිටෙක්චර්ස් අපිට ඕනෑයි කියන එකට විසඳුමක් කියන්නේ උත්තරයක් තියෙනවා. මොකද ඉන්ටර්වියුස් වල වගේදී එහෙම අහන්නේ ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඒ වගේ ප්‍රශ්න. මිසක් MVC මේ වෙබ් ඇප්ලිකේෂන් එකක් හදලා පෙන්නන්න කියන්නේ නැහැ ඉතින්. MVC කියන්නේ මොකද්ද and why we need MVC? එන්කැප්සුලේෂන් කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? ඇයි එන්කැප්සුලේෂන් ඕන? මං හිතන්නේ මෙතන ඉන්න අපි කී දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවද? 35ක් ඉන්නවනේ. මේ 35න් 5 දෙනෙක් වගේ දන්නවා ඇති ඇයි එන්කැප්සුලේෂන් කියලා එකක් ඕනේ. ඇයි කන්ස්ට්‍රක්ටර් ඕවර්ලෝඩින් කියලා එකක් ඕනේ. ඇයි එහෙම එකක් හැදුවේ? ඉත්තෑව දුවන හින්දාද හදලා තියෙන්නේ? කාට හරි නෑනේ. ඒකට හේතුවක් තියෙනවා. හරිද? එතකොට අන්න ඒවා දැනගෙන ඉතිහාම හරි. ඒවා දන්නේ නැති නිසා තමයි ඔය ඉන්ටර්විව් අමාරුයි අර මේවා කියන්නේ කට්ටිය ඇවිල්ලා. ඒක තමයි මට මේකෙන් කියන්න ඕනේ උනේ MVCත් නෙමෙයි ඇත්තටම. ඒ බේසික් ආකිටෙක්චර් එක අන්ඩර්ස්ටෑන්ඩ් කරගන්න. එතකොට ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. හරිද? දැන් යුනිවර්සිටි වලින් දෙන්නෙත් ඇත්තටම ඒ නොලෙජ් එක තමයි. why we need this. ඒක මිසක් දැන් අර මං කිව්වනේ third level 3 semester 1 එකේ උගන්වුවත් මේවා උගන්වන්නේ MVC .NET MVC Spring MVC නෙමෙයි. ඒක උගන්වන්නේ ඇයි ඒක ඕනේ? ඇයි disadvantages advantages අන්න ඒවා දැනගෙන ඉන්න. හරි. I hope you understood why we need MVC and what are the problems that the MVC solves and what as an extension to the MVC we have MVVM model view model architecture and what problems that it solves. So if you don't understand anything, or if you want more clarifications, you can ask questions from me anytime. Or if we have time, we can take some questions now.
Uh, Actually, this was a very valuable session, and actually, we were seeking for the sessions like this because in coming months, actually, we expect that we are about to participate to the interviews and for internships. So I'm pretty sure this is a very valuable session, and so actually, we need to thank you. We need to show gratitude to you. So we have prepared a small vote of thanks. So I cordially invite Shenali to deliver the vote of thanks.
First of all, I would like to convey my gratitude to IDS Department, Dr. Sirumanwadu and instructors for organizing this session on behalf of our batch. And our guest speaker, software engineer Mr. Nishant Chaturanga, IA. We are glad to have you today with us. Actually, today we gain a valuable experience and knowledge taking part to this session. I'm sure it is the conclusion in everyone's mind. And of course, we are determined and expect to work on our projects according to guidelines and advice provided by you. Thank you for your valuable time, effort, and support for this event amid your busy schedules. And of course, we hope to have more sessions from you in the future. And last, please accept our apologies for any inconvenience or mistakes from our end. Thank you, IA.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.